Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot, and Leave, a podcast about the psychology that moves us. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how we adapt, evolve, and find meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Today, we will talk to someone who is intercultural consultant and he is in the business for more than 3 decades in Australia. He is Doctor of Business Administration in Cultural Intelligence and Global Leadership. Please welcome Dr. Tom Verghese. How are you, Tom?
Very good, Gautam. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Today, we will talk about psychology of culture.
Mhm.
Michel Leberon describes different cultures as underground rivers. My first basic question, or maybe it's a deep question, what is culture? Is it something what we have or something we are continuously becoming?
That's a very good question. And while I'm listening to you ask that question, I'm thinking in my own mind, where do I start? How far back do we go? So if you think about culture, it came root of the word is really from agriculture. So
Okay.
as in the field of anthropology looked at it as the way we behave, the culture of a group. And so it's the behavior of a group is what when we talk about culture, that's generally what we mean. But of course, you have individual cultures, the individual of how they are, and then you have organizational culture, which is how things are done in an organization. So culture, if you look at one of the grandfathers of culture was someone called Gert Hofstede, a Dutch anthropologist. His definition of culture is that it's the programming of the mind which distinguishes one group of people from another. So it's not the skin color, it's not your ethnicity, it's not your language, it's not your religion. It's actually a way of thinking. Of course, all those other aspects are part of your culture, but it's not what defines culture. So I like to think about it as the way of thinking.
Then, what is cultural intelligence? The reason I'm asking this because with this lot of social media or information is becoming cheap, many people understand the pattern cognitively,
Mhm.
yet remain behaviorally very unchanged.
Yes.
So, is it a skill or awareness, or what is it?
It's both. So cultural intelligence is defined as the ability to interact effectively with people from different cultural backgrounds. Right? So that's what cultural intelligence is. Now, cultural intelligence has four different aspects to it. Firstly, there's drive, what we call cultural intelligence drive, which is your motivation to want to deal with people who are from different cultural backgrounds. There's knowledge, which is all the ways, similarities, and differences that people have from different cultures. Then that informs your strategy. How do I plan so that I'm interacting differently? What do I need to adjust? And then there is what we call CQ action, which is how do I put it in place? So all four are important aspects. So to your question, Gautam, area that traditionally people spend a lot of time in is the space of CQ knowledge, building my awareness of different cultures, how they operate, etc. But the challenge is how to actually execute is difficult.
So cultural intelligence basically it's to understand more of that from these different dimensions, right?
Correct.
Can
And
you
be able to
please
deal with it effectively.
right. So can you please go a little deeper into it to give us more information around these dimensions?
So the biggest study on dimensions originally was done by someone called Gerd Hofstede. Actually, prior to him, there was someone called Edward Hall. But Hofstede did a big study of about more than 100,000 people, and he was able then, for the first time, to map cultural dimensions and cultural differences, right, of multiple countries around the world. And then on that has been built the work of people like Trompenas, Asma Abdullah, Aaron Myers. So there's lots of other work that has built around it. So, but what cultural dimensions are just the differences that people have from background. So it's a preference. Let's talk, for instance, about time. We have linear time. So in certain cultures, Gautam, time is punctual. So in other words, we have a meeting at 9, we start at 9. If I invite you to my house for dinner at 7, you would arrive at 7. You probably arrive at 5 to 7 and park outside, and then at 7 you would knock on the door. Very precise. Okay, so if you think of cultures and countries, so the Germans, the Swiss, all those people they're very precise, and it is seen as it's a very important value. Now, it doesn't mean everybody in the culture is on time. It is a high value. Now, compare that to a country like, say, India, where you're from. We talk about Indian Standard Time, right? Which is it's loose. So meeting is supposed to start at 9. They probably start at 9:15, 9:20, when everybody comes. I invite you to my house at 7. I wouldn't do that at 7 anyway. It'd probably be 9. You'd probably come at about 10, 10:30, and it's perfectly fine. So it's what we call much, much more polychronic as compared to monochronic. So doesn't mean everybody in places like India is not adherent to being on time. It's not that, but there is a value to if I am not on time, it's okay. People are not going to get upset. Okay, so that's an example of cultural a dimension on the aspect of time. So how does that play out? Well, it plays out, for instance, I remember years ago being on visiting India with a client, and we were having a couple of meetings, and the first meeting, we were already kept waiting, and the client was getting very upset because he was interpreting that behavior as being rude, getting agitated. So you can imagine if you're agitated going into a meeting, it's not going to go well, right? Because you're already agitated. Your frame of mind is different. Whereas trying to explain, saying, listen, it's not that, doesn't mean they're being rude, doesn't mean anything like that. Things have come up, just chill. You just got to relax. Conversely, the other way, if somebody from that country was coming to have a meeting with this particular individual, if they were not on time, they would be seen as unprofessional.
Right. So as you mentioned one dimension, which is time,
Yeah.
there is another thing which we all kind of felt and work with it or towards it, which is the power difference,
Power distance, yes?
hierarchy. Can you please explain that? Because as an Indian, sometimes I feel very claustrophobic
Mm-hmm.
to deal with this hierarchy, but some people are okay with it.
Countries where power is important, hierarchy is important, there is a high value placed on things like titles, status, age. It's all important, right? Those things are important. So, therefore, someone junior speaking to someone senior, it would have to be respectful. Otherwise, it's seen as being rude. Conversely, in a country like Australia, we are far more egalitarian here. They have a saying here called the tall poppy syndrome, right? Which is around chopping everybody down. Like, so we want you, as a country, Australians want you to be successful, but they don't want you to be too successful. Okay? Don't make me look bad, I mean.
Mm.
So the thing is like here, so because it's much more egalitarian, doesn't matter whether you're a junior or a senior, I'm able to call you by your first name. I'm able to challenge you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's far more egalitarian, which in a hierarchical culture, you just wouldn't do that. I mean, we learn that from a very young age in hierarchical cultures. Don't challenge, don't speak up, be very careful on how you deal with conflict. So those are all cultural. It's what we call the rules of the game. You learn the rules of the game. Now, to your point, doesn't mean that everybody likes the rules of the game. But if I'm playing that game, I play by those rules because, like, what choice do I have? Unless I leave the game. But if you were in India dealing with those as clients, you would still have to play that game to a certain extent because that game is important. And there is a lot of history on why the hierarchy there is an important thing. Malaysia is the same. Malaysia is one of the most hierarchical cultures in the world. Japan, the seniority, the tenure, etc., is important.
So that means you are saying that, which I really like the way you said it, that when you are in that game, don't worry too much or don't think too much on what you like, what you don't like. Just abide by the rules of that game.
Understand the game you're playing.
Yeah.
So if we are playing soccer, it's like what are the rules of soccer? So I may be an amazing rugby player, right? But it doesn't mean I can just transfer from rugby onto soccer because different rules. Speed, size of the ball, how you move, all different. So cultural intelligence is exactly that, is the ability to understand, okay, now I'm playing soccer, how do I play soccer effectively? Oh, now I'm playing rugby. How do I do that effectively so that I get the outcomes that I'm wanting? I'm in a meeting with people of different cultures. Why am I here? What's my purpose? And how do I achieve that? How do I build relationships?
Another critical thing might be this morality, ethics, and transparency.
Mhm.
It also has some cultural impact on it, right?
Yes.
How you see that?
The more economically successful a country becomes, the less you will have corruption in play, right? Because standards of living for everybody increases. So therefore, transparency then becomes more important. Whereas in much more survival-based cultures, corruption is very much accepted as part of the norm. Not saying everybody likes it, but everybody kind of knows, well, let's pay a little bit more, like because that will just move the dial. And it's also about survival, and it's accepted. It's not seen as corrupt. Not saying so. Again, going back to the rules. Not saying everybody likes it, but people understand that's the way we kind of do it. Whereas the more successful a society becomes, the more people will go, no, there is a level of, and they tend to be far more egalitarian as well, far more equality based because wealth is distributed.
Individual personality comes into play or not really in a collective?
Absolutely. No, no, I think individual personality always comes into play. As an individual, if you are part of the culture, you understand the rules of the game and you know how to play it. I'm just going to use the analogy of that. But how much I play, how I do that will also be based on me as an individual. So if we go back to the thing about hierarchy, the example that you gave, I mean, you knew from a very early age, being in India, that hierarchy was important. But you chose not to participate in that as you became an adult. So
Hmm.
that's your personality now coming through, and you also having the choice. So that's where personality and individual comes to play. I mean, individuals are different. And then we have, of course, personality profiles, depending on different types of tools that, whether it's like things like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Herman Brain. So there's different types of that. And then there's an argument saying that those things are in fact more important universally than cultural differences. So it depends on which lens you're using. But if you, as an interculturalist, we look at it as saying, well, there are certain cultural norms that this group, different groups follow. And the reason why those groups follow those norms is because it makes sense for them.
Basically, we are not talking about making a good friendship or lifelong partner or all these things. This is a work environment, and you have to play that rule with your acquaintances and get the job done. Okay,
Yes.
after that, if you become friend, then all rules probably collapse and
Or they become, you work in a way that makes sense. The rules that you create make sense to maintain the friendship. Because if you think of your friendship group, you will all your friendship group, you will have shared values, right? It's like a Venn diagram. You need to have overlaps. Otherwise, there's no friendship. Coming from Malaysia, I had a very loose concept of time. We have Malaysian Standard Time, right? So, 9 o'clock means 9:30, like it's not a big deal, right? In my early years of going out with my wife, who was at that time my girlfriend, I remember once I was late picking her up. And we had a good talking to, and she said that to me. She said, no, if you cannot be on time, then no, we cannot have this relationship because I can't trust you, right? So that for me was important for me to kind of say, okay, I'm now going to shift my behavior because the relationship is important to me. I started becoming on time. But when I go to places like Malaysia and India, can I slip into being more loose with time? Yes.
We feel kind of at ease with that chaos.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Okay.
we have been exposed to it. But if you haven't been exposed to it, it becomes chaos. It becomes, what's happening here?
So normally, is there any timeline? It takes, I don't know, 7 years, 8 years. If you are actually go to a new culture, that adaptation time is, if you are not, let's say, reading or consciously choosing every time.
I don't think
Generation
it's so
it
much
depends.
about time, Gautam. I think it's about exposure. It's about exposure, how much
Right.
exposure you have of people from that cultural background. So, for instance, many a time as immigrants, if I just use the example of immigrants, when immigrants come into any country, anywhere in the world, you find they will tend to gather with people of the same background. All immigrant groups do that. Why? Because it's a sense of comfort. Language, food, belief systems, religion, history, comfort, right? And it's the children, second, third generation, who then go to school, mix with the group, and then they're the ones to kind of. So when we talk about the initial immigrant groups, they probably have the most difficult, depending on what age they are when they come into the country, because the younger you are, the easier it is. The older it is, it's much more difficult. So the kids of immigrants, we talk about how the term is code switching. Code switching. So when I go to school, I can become like the dominant culture, say AG here, Western, Australian, whatever. But then I come home to my parents who may be Greek, and I just switch into Greek language. Greek. So it's code switching, and we all do that. But but if you think about it from a business perspective, from the psychology of culture, going back to cultural intelligence, drive, knowledge, strategy, and action, my research demonstrated that effective global leaders are all have high intrinsic drive and are very strategic. Both of those, all of them had knowledge. Some were very knowledgeable of other cultures, others were very low because they were doing, like, I had one client, he was doing like 4 countries in a week. So he had very low, other people knew action. Some people are very good at adapting, other people were not. But because they were strategic, they knew who to deal with, how to deal with it, who were the important players, and the planning was good before they went into any meetings of how they would then run the meetings. And because they had high drive, they made it a point to lean in. Being an international or global leader, those things become really important.
So that means there should be some intrinsic interest to know and learn about people. That thing is very important, as you said, right?
Correct. Correct.
And
Yeah.
second most important thing is how you strategize about yourself to manifest outside.
All cultures are what we call, I'll use the term, are ethnocentric. Ethnocentric means I use my culture as the center and I compare everything else with this because this is what I'm familiar with, right? So this is the normal, this is norm of how I do it, and then everything else is abnormal. Good, bad, clean, dirty, all beautiful, ugly, or I use it with my comparison. What we want to get people to do is move from being ethnocentric to ethno-relative. And ethno-relative is that ability to kind of say, okay, in my culture, that may not be as important or is, but from another perspective, this is how they look, we look at it.
Is there any moral boundary, like where adapting to another culture compromises one's identity?
Well, I think that argument is if you are adapting to another culture and you are having then to compromise on your own values, for instance, you could have what we call cognitive dissonance in yourself, right? Which could lead to other your own issues and problems. So just before we came on this call with you, I was speaking to old client of mine. She's Japanese. She's been working in Australia now for 10 years, and she was talking about how when she was dealing with some of the Japanese counterparts, she found it so difficult. Just the manner in the way that they were talking to her, the gender differences, the way they expected, made her realize how much she far preferred the Australian style of being much more egalitarian and much more open. For me, that's a classic example of somebody who came from one cultural background, has tried something else, and has now accepted this. So it's not a cognitive dissonance.
If any ecosystem, there is more number of one particular ethnic group operating, doesn't matter how educated they are, doesn't matter how exposed they are in the outer world, all those perceived biasness and all these things normally comes, right?
Yes, yes.
And you
You
can't
just
change it.
I was in India last year working with an IT group. Had a couple of people in there who were non-Indians in this particular group I was working with, sharing in the group how the leadership, they'd been for some social event. The leadership team were all from India. She said they were all talking about cricket, not bearing in mind that there were all these other people who came from outside of India who had no knowledge and no interest in cricket. That's why we attract and we are comfortable with people who are of the same cultural background, because we know the rules. We tend to trust people who are similar to us, which is why cross-cultural work, you have to really challenge some of your biases. Cultural diversity becomes a challenge, right? Because I'm having to really think about what are some of the prejudices I already have.
I really like the word exposure. So more exposure is better. That
Mm.
means you are getting more and more intelligent around culture. Then what? We are better off masking our own biases, or it's kind of diluting from our own
No,
head.
I don't think it's so much about masking our own biases. We start then questioning some of our own biases. Most of us don't recognize our bias. We have biases that we are conscious of, explicit. The problems are the implicit, the unconscious biases. So
Hmm.
until and unless we can recognize those biases and go, oh, that's a bias I have. Why do I have that bias? Where does it come from? And more exposure than challenges. So I'm going to give you an example because I'm been working with a team recently and they work all around the region in Asia Pac. And there was a bias that if people who didn't speak language well, and here we're talking about English because that was the lingua franca of the group. So people, if they didn't speak English well, then they couldn't be that smart. See the link being made, right? Like, so then part of the challenge becomes getting people to appreciate, well, they may not speak English that well, but English may be their second, third, or fourth language. And when we are on a virtual call, sometimes a 30 or 40-second delay on a virtual call might seem like 3 minutes. But if English is my third or fourth language, you ask me a question, I need to take that question, translate that maybe into my native tongue, think of a response, and then come out, right? And it's always very much more difficult to be impressive in a language that is not my native tongue. I remember years ago interviewing this, he was from the US and he spent his university years as an engineer in Germany. And one of the lines that really struck me is that, Tom, it was so difficult to appear intelligent when I couldn't speak German fluently. And for him, that was an amazing experience because that made him a far more effective leader globally because he knew the judgment that came from language.
For a young person today, how they can educate themselves to become a global professional. So maybe top five things.
Definitely, we have far more information available today. So, expose yourself to that. Appreciate that so many of the information sources that we get have a level of bias anyway. So, being appreciative of that. That's one. Two is really around exposure. So, how do I expose myself by perhaps experiencing different types of food, different types of music, different types of people? How do I engage in conversations? How do I broaden my own repertoire. That's the intrinsic drive that comes in. So if you ask most people, are you interested in people with different cultures? Most people say yes. I have level of cultural intelligence. I love culture, different cultures, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so when the last time you had a social occasion in your house, how many people from different cultures did you have? What we say and then what we do are different things. So it's how do I develop that friendship? How do I reach out perhaps to people from other parts of the world and find common links? Sport, art, music. But then what is also my purpose in doing it? So as a young person, if I want to work globally, for instance, if I want to travel, if I want to see the world, then it gives me a reason to know more about it. Otherwise, most people are just, on the immediate. I mean, in the days of our grandparents, nobody traveled more than 100 kilometers from home, right?
When 20 years back I came to Gold Coast, okay,
Mhm.
hardly any. I mean, there are Indians, but like we are
Very
like
few, very
blending
few.
is very normal, and that's the only way. And then from there, when I moved to Sydney, every community has their solid bunch of people and communities and clubs and everything. So
Yep,
slowly I'm getting segregated from that multiculturalism to my own ethnic group. And now I'm in
yes.
Melbourne, and here also I find a good balance. But more and more your community people are coming, people are again kind of magneted towards their own ethnic
Of course.
sentiment.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
easier. I can speak to you in the same language. We have common reference points. Doesn't require as much effort.
So is it what? Is it only the first generation phenomena, right? From second generation, they kind of switch culture and they kind of blended more into it, right?
It's easier for the second and it's easier for the third. But what happens is then the culture differences, but they come across other challenges, racism, other aspects of discrimination. So it depends on where the minority, majority, power, privilege, all these things come into play. So the challenge for us is as we become the second, third generation, it becomes easier in many ways because they've grown up here, they know the rules of the game.
Hmm.
So in theory, it should be easier. In theory, it doesn't always equate.
As these days in corporate world, everyone is talking about diversity and inclusion. If you ask different immigrants, they probably say very different things. Even if you ask the same question to bunch of Caucasian, they will say probably very different story also. What is this diversity inclusion on paper look like, and where things are getting derailed?
I think things are getting derailed in the last few years. We've certainly seen it given the global change of world order and the political process that's happening around the world, that the attention has been taken away from diversity and inclusion. I find that organizations who are committed to getting the best out of their workforce, that they want to have high employee engagement, they are always working on how can we be more inclusive. And the thing with diversity is in any group of people, Gautam, inevitably there is diversity, right? Even though we may all be from the same cultural backgrounds, there'll be diversity. So you just now put different cultures, different genders, different generations, different education. That's already diversity. The challenge for leaders is how do I tap into that diversity, right? How do I get innovative thinking? How do I get different ways of looking at the world based on differences? Because otherwise, all we're trying to do is get everybody to be the same. That doesn't get the best out of your people. That doesn't get the best thinking. Last week with a client, and it was really interesting to watch. We had a couple of people there in the group who were in their 20s, and they were very vocal in what they wanted the leaders to be like. They were vocal.
Hmm.
And it was very different to people there who were in their 40s and 50s. It was markedly different. I mean, I raised it actually with the client. I said, wow, it was really interesting to listen. That's generational difference. Now, we can on one side say, oh, what do they know? They're young people, etc. But conversely, the challenge becomes, okay, now how do we tap into that, right? That energy, that freshness, that idealism, that belief that I can change the world. That's a nice place to be for a while, right? Compared to perhaps on the other side, people going, too hard, leave me alone, it will never work. This is the way we've done it for the last 50 years. So, another dimension that is important in cultural differences is task versus relationships. So, task oriented cultures, what they want to do is want to get a job done. They'll come out and they'll say, okay, what needs to be done? Let's do it and let's get on with it. We don't need to get to know each other personally. Relationship oriented cultures tend to think, well, let's get to know you. Like, who are you? Who's your family? Where did you go to school? And sometimes these questions come across as being very intrusive. But the reason they want to do that is they want to get to know who you are. Now, ultimately, the reason why they want to do that is because the better the relationship, the more effective the outcomes will be. In task oriented cultures, right? I want to get the job done because if I'm focused on getting the job done, then it'll be effective. So at the end of the day, we both want to get the job done. It's how do we go about doing it? The challenge becomes if you're from much more of a relationship oriented culture, working in a task oriented work environment, you come across, if you're not careful, to be seen as time wasting. Vice versa, if you're from a task oriented culture, spending time in a relationship based culture, and you don't ask a lot of questions, you tend to come across as being cold, harsh. That's where cultural intelligence comes into play.
So we are almost in the last phase of it. So as you are cultural advocate, I advocate lived
Yeah.
experience of any sort, okay? Because lived experience is a strong part of individual value and individual culture. How we can more integrate lived experience into mainstream professional culture.
Good question. I think the lived experience is something that comes from sharing stories. So, culture actually is all about stories. The way we teach culture is all about stories. Okay, it's not data points, it's not stats. How parents bring up children, the way we tell stories, that's how we teach culture. The reason why lived experience is important is that ability to hear the story of the other person. So it's the old saying of let's walk in someone else's shoes, right? So I may not be able to walk in your shoes, but if I give you the space to tell your story, and if I can sit here and listen to it without being judgmental, without my own biases kind of coming in, it gives me an insight. That's the value of the lived experience. And culture is no different, right? So the whole thing about culture is that how do we share more stories?
That means what we have to share more and more individual stories.
We have to do more conversations. We are now today more interconnected with people than we've ever been before. Yet, the level of loneliness, the level of anxiety that people are facing is skyrocketing. It's a paradox.
Maybe
There's
the
no,
storytelling is missing there.
it's missing. Everything is short form. Everything is quick. Everything is fast. As I say in my culture, there's something that comes from breaking bread together. And when you break bread together, that's a collective experience.
We rather think about it and rather calm down a bit and be more focused and more engaged with the people we are surrounded by. Hopefully, that will help us